Hi everyone, I am here for a live with Cassandra Snow and Siri Vincent Plouff. We are going to be talking about their fabulous lessons from the Empress. I am just looking at, here we go. Cassandra, and I am just, let's see. Okay.
Hello.
Oh, yay, it worked. This is my first time coordinating it with more than one person, so I was unsure how it would go, but it worked out, so yay.
Yay.
And
Hello.
so much for your patience. I somehow managed to completely lose an hour in terms of the time difference, so thank you so much for being patient with me with that. I was just mentioning that we're going live to talk about your fabulous lessons from the Empress. I adore this book. I've been waiting with bated breath because I ordered it through a smaller bookseller. Well, still big, it's Chapters Indigo, so it is the largest bookseller here, but it wasn't Amazon, so I thought, yay, that's a bonus. And it arrived on Thursday, so super delayed. So I was like, okay, let's go. And I managed to read it in time and just ate up all of the fabulous information that you've included in here. It's so wonderful. Yeah, and actually, before we get started, I just wanted to give a little intro for anyone who isn't familiar with your work. Siri Vincent Plouff, I hope I pronounced that properly. Good. Is a Nordic witch writer and teacher and a professional rune and tarot reader. They are also the host, of the Heathen's Journey podcast, which I started exploring, and it is utterly fabulous. I loved your episode about a history of Odinism and white supremacy. I listened to that one, and also was just listening to the most recent one that you had with Thomas about all of their writing, and it was fabulous. And you can find Siri's work on northernlightswitch.com, Instagram, and also both of you actually have a Patreon, and that is super exciting as well. And then Cassandra Snow is the author of Queering the Tarot and Queering Your Craft, two utterly fabulous books. And they are also a professional tarot reader and teacher, and you can find them at cassandra-snow.com. So as a little intro. So yeah, I thought I would start by asking, where did the collaboration for this book come from? How did that originate? Where did the ideas come from? I think maybe there were some workshops that you had done previously. Yeah, so I'd love to know.
Yeah, so I will start just because Siri was picking something up, but
I'm so sorry. Like I have chaos happening over here.
That is yeah, so Siri did a workshop called Self-Care in Weird Times, weird with a Y, with a different mutual friend of ours, Lacey, who runs The Future here in Minneapolis. And then I wanted to do about a year later, I wanted to do a long form tarot class about creativity, and Siri wanted to bring that class back in some form or fashion. So we started brainstorming and did Creating in Weird Times. And we were like really in the heart of the pandemic too. So people were really hungry for that. The book came about because Siri and I are the way that we are. And worksheets for each of those 6 sessions ended up being like 25 pages each, roughly. So it was a little intense. And then Siri said, what if we put this together and sell it as like a zine on our website? And I said, who wants to read a 100-page digital zine? No offense. What if we fill this out more and shop it to my publisher, Wiser Books? So that's what we ended up doing. And doing that allowed us to expand quite a bit. We went beyond creation into why creativity is such a vital piece of self-care and how it is something we should still all be nurturing. So yeah, I think that's what I want to say. Do you want to jump in now that it's unchaotic?
I think that's a really good summary. I think that it was kind of like, oh, like we did this really rich workshop and, you know, like definitely weren't going to run that in perpetuity. You know, so we were like, okay, how can we continue to bring this work into the world? And I think that was really the emphasis there. So yeah.
Oh, that's fabulous. And so I know, Cassandra, you've written 2 other books already. What was the process of collaborating like? Like, I know that you both know each other previously and that you've worked on the workshop together, so I'd imagine that there was some synchronicity there, obviously. And you can tell from the book, I mean, there's such a fluid flow. There's little snippets where you have input by both of you, but otherwise, it's a very fluid, kind of seamless process in terms of the writing, which is, as a reader, is really fabulous.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, I like collaborating. You know, my other background outside of this world is in theater, so I'm very used to a collaborative process. I've always approached theater, even as a director-producer, very collaboratively. I've always wanted it to be everybody's show that we all can take ownership over, including the audience in a way, you know. And so on top of that, Siri and I are like really good friends. Like, our lives are very intertwined in a number of ways, and so I think there was a safety in that. I think that was challenging at a point because we are both really sensitive, but we also know how to approach things. And so I actually think it made it a really seamless process. And because I like a challenge, like, I would actually be interested to collaborate with someone who I didn't know as well if there was like a book at some point in the future. But for me, it was really lovely, and it was like hanging out with my friend, only we were writing down what we were saying. So
yeah, I think like the collaboration process was really natural. It flowed really naturally from the workshop that we taught. I mean, you know, kind of like Cassandra said, like the nuts and bolts writing of it. We actually had divvied up the workbook aspects, and the way that we ran the workshop was that, you know, we would both of course teach every night, but one of us would be in charge of like the primary structure of the workshop for certain nights, and then we would write the workbook to go with, you know, like our teaching plan kind of, or you know, we would just write the workbook for that. And so it was already pretty well divvied up in terms of the work. Like for the book, I think that a lot of people are kind of like, oh my God, like how do you write a book with someone? And it's like, well, you just decide what parts you're writing and what parts they're writing, and then you contribute like later, and it's fine. But yeah, it was definitely challenging. I think that like challenging in a good way. Like I said in an interview earlier today, it was very much that like 5 of Wands sort of challenge where like I feel like a lot of people kind of see that card as like, oh my God, conflict, blah. But I see it as like playing around and experimenting and kind of like pushing one another. And that was really great. I also was truly honored. And honestly, I'm very thankful that my first book, like Cassandra had already had experience like with publishing. Like I don't know. I think about like if neither of us were published at the time that we were shopping this, like I don't know how that would have happened, because we were trying to do so much in the one book, and a lot of times publishers are like, well, you're trying to do so much, I don't know how I'm going to sell it. So like I don't know if we would have a book in the same way.
Well, it's helpful to have someone who does have experience and is already working with a publisher, because then you have that one foot in the door, which is often, I think, from an outside perspective looking in, and for what I limitedly know, is that even a word? My limited knowledge of publishing, that can sometimes be the hardest step, right? Getting that foot in the door and building that relationship with someone who has already vetted you and knows, okay, yes, you produced this for me, so we're willing to take a shot with something different, right? I mean, I would say that there is definitely, from my perspective, crossover with your previous books, Cassandra, in terms of bringing queerness into it and the self-care aspects and some of the unpacking of the cards, which is helpful. There's so much in this book, and yet you've somehow managed to create a really nice flow with it, and the organization of how everything is, it's very mindful how everything is structured. And, you know, I was writing some notes earlier about, you know, there's the introduction, and then you know, even the breakdown of the first section and the second section, and how you introduce the idea of, you know, connecting with your inner Empress, the basics of tarot for self-care, tarot and ritual, tarot and elemental magic. It's like there's all of these building blocks that are working towards unpacking all of the cards. And even as someone who's practiced tarot for a really long time, that was super helpful in terms of, okay, I've practiced tarot for a while, but looking at it through the lens of the Empress, how does that shift this practice for me? How do I incorporate these elements and then go through each of the cards? And a lot of what you had to share about some of the cards were things that I hadn't even considered before, like new reworkings of, especially I'm thinking the Nine of Cups, the Five of Wands that you were just talking about. It's so magical to me to be able to read these books and get a new perspective on something that maybe I've worked with before. I'm being way too verbose here, but I really appreciate the way that it was approached, because there is a lot of information here. So what was that process like of structuring things and breaking it down into sections and figuring out what was going to go where and all of that? Yeah.
So I actually, oh, sorry, I was just going to say, I actually think we worked a little bit more free-spirited than that, in that it was more like we came up with the structure and then we just gave each other a blank check to say, write whatever you want on the sections that are yours. We will worry about making it cohesive later. And we had talked about so much stuff with this book that really the making it cohesive part was not even super substantial. Like, it was fine. So I think it was more, you know, we're doing a book about creativity. Siri is incredibly creative in their own right, and I love the way that they bring their practice with heathenry and, you know, northern practices into this book. And I think that was really generative, even for me, to see different workings of things. And then with my background in theater as well as previous books written. So I think part of the reason we were able to do so much is because we are so different in some ways. But then part of the reason we were able to make it cohesive is because we both play nice with others.
That's an important element for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was that, and like, because we'd already taught the workshop, right? Like, we had already like gone through in real time. Cassandra made this point again, like in an interview that we did earlier today. But we saw in real time like what was resonating for students, like what really seemed to be extra valuable for them. And so we were able to expand on that in the book. It was an interesting way of writing the book, because sometimes when I think about like teaching and writing, like I think about, okay, like what comes first, and often I tend to think that the writing comes first, and in some ways it did with this, because we wrote those like ridiculous worksheets. I mean, truly, like, who needs a 30-page worksheet, you know?
I agree. I'm a lifelong student, and I applaud that, because I thrive on new information. So that just like, but I not everyone feels that way. So yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So I think that also really helped it be cohesive. I do think too that Cassandra had mentioned me bringing in like the Nordic practices, and I always feel like I need to say this because this is a book about tarot, right? You know, like, it's not a specific magical background or anything like that. Like, it is the rituals in the book are heavily informed by my practice of Trolldom Nordic folk magic. However, they are not written as Nordic specific practices. Like, they're not culturally specific to that. So I think that influence is there, but isn't, I don't know. I don't want people to be like freaked out if they're like, oh my God, like, I don't know anything about Nordic stuff.
Oh no, and when I said that too, I'll clarify on my end. I specifically meant like the way that you approach like archetypes, the way that you and like some of the stories that you kind of worked from or broke down, versus the ones I did, which were coming out of a lot of like theater lore and history. And so it just made it, I think, I like the word well-rounded, because I also think we did a decent job making it cohesive. So I think different influences made it a nice, well-rounded project.
Sure, for sure. Well, it's very cohesive and it's very accessible as well. Like there's the myths and the archetypes that have been incorporated and woven into, I guess that's the best way of putting it, into this book in such a way that they support the ideas that you're bringing up in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming. Like you could be new to come to tarot and you have a wonderful section in here on how to approach tarot, how to approach the practice, right? For someone that's new to it, it's very, very helpful. For someone who has more experience, it's also helpful because there's those shifts in perspectives and this layering of new information that is so rich. I have a theater background as well, and I find that collaborative process is so powerful, and like there's a real difference between a rehearsal night and a live performance because you have the energy of the audience and it's going to create a different feel. And even in terms of exploring material, like when you do something one night, you'll get a huge laugh from the audience, and then the next night it'll fall flat. And it's about figuring out like where is that dynamic going to come into play. I mean, I say this not having stepped on stage for a really long time. But it's a fascinating process, and there's an energy to it that I would imagine with doing those workshops first, it really would have augmented, you know, what you chose to include and how you chose to include it in really magical ways, I would say.
And one thing I think we weren't even thinking about when we were writing the book, we have done a number of interviews and a number of live events together. Yeah. And so I think it has also created that banter and that intimacy and familiarity with the audience and the readership that really calls on that too. And it also makes me really eager. Like, I would love for Siri to do well enough with the Heathen's Journey podcast that you like tour the podcast. I think that would be so cool.
That would be incredible. That would be absolutely incredible. Oh, I would love that.
Sorry, like you probably saw that light bulb moment where I was like, oh my God.
That would be phenomenal. I would be 100% here for it. I love it. Yeah, no, that would be incredible. So in terms of, oh, and I just wanted to mention too, like you reach the end of the book and you have this amazing, I just pulled the tarot spread from it this morning. In the final thoughts section, you have this amazing continuing your relationship with the Empress. And then the final ritual so beautifully blends together all of the elements that you introduce. Like you have the tarot spread, and then there's also the sachet that you put together and the ritual oil and all of that. And I love that it's such a beautiful way of combining all of the things. It's almost like when you take a university course and you go through all the material and then you have a final exam, but it's way less anxiety provoking than like having to study and figure out like what you're going to have to answer, right? But it's such a beautiful way of blending all of those things together. And then at the end, kind of past the end of the book, you have the appendix with the materia, and then also the creative approaches to the tarot. And I love that that's included because there's so much richness to that and so much context in terms of the herbs that you're using and the crystals that you're incorporating and how to incorporate creativity in your day-to-day life. Like that I think is one of the things that's so magical about this book. It's like you can take it from the realm of learning and put it directly into how do I incorporate this into my day-to-day life. So what were some of the key things that you wanted people to take away from the book in terms of rituals and practices and yeah.
So I wrote the chapters on ritual, and I wrote the rituals at the end of the chapters. And I'm so glad that you like asked that question and kind of framed it that way, because I as a teacher, and because this came out of a workshop that we taught together, I really wanted it to be like, okay, like we're building in complexity until you get to this final ritual where we're incorporating every piece of what we've done so far. Yeah. So I'm really glad that landed.
Oh, it definitely did. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like in terms of ritual, it's interesting. I was going through a pretty intense magical redevelopment during the course of writing this book. And so I really stripped down a lot of my magical processes to be like, okay, if you do every single one of these actions with intention, like they're simple, but they're powerful. And I also take so I've been a practicing witch for 20 years, and I have written almost all of my own spells in that time. Like I don't actually do spells as they are written in books. So
Yeah.
I highly encourage people to adapt things so that they make more sense for them.
Yeah.
One of the goals with the section on like the appendix on materia was to provide context for why we're using the plants that we're using, or I remember very specifically I was writing the section on potential crystals that you could use, and I'm not a crystal witch really. Like, I think they're shiny and pretty, but I like don't often work with them. And I was at the Future, like doing some shop witch work, and I was writing about crystals, and I was like, oh my God, crystals are amazing. Like, in a way that I'm not normally at all. So I think that was probably helpful. But yeah, I really wanted people to be able to like at least take one action in every single ritual that was their deviation from the ritual. Like, I didn't want people to do them fully as written, because why, right? You know, like, this is about creativity. I want to inspire creativity in the rituals. The other reason for that is very practical. I am allergic to cinnamon, which is in like almost every prosperity spell like that involves herbs that you can find. Like, I have to be very careful about what herbs and oils I use for prosperity magic in particular, but I mean cinnamon is also in just a lot. So I wanted to provide alternatives to the herbs if other people have sensitivities.
Well, I appreciated too that the herbs that you've listed are very accessible. I did an herbal apprenticeship on Vancouver Island a few years ago, and I got into so many, and I have an herbal shelf downstairs that's full of tons of things, and most of them I use regularly, but some I haven't touched in a really long time. So it's nice to have things that are easily accessible or can be tracked down relatively easily at a metaphysical shop, or, you know, through wherever. But I also like that you have suitable replacements, right? So if people do have the allergies, have an allergy, or, you know, can't source a particular element, then it's great that that other option is available too. I really appreciated that.
Sorry, that's a thread that actually comes through all of Cassandra's work, and that I really agree with, is making materials as accessible as possible. I mean, a lot of herbs for magic, you can just use kitchen herbs, you know, like rosemary is one of my favorites. And that's, you know, just in the kitchen. So like, I think that was very important to both Cassandra and I.
And I was going to say too, a like boring like book business thing, when we were talking to Wiser, one of the things they were really excited about was the idea of shopping this overseas, and like not specifically, you know, US or North America. And so we were also very aware that like what you can just grab at the grocery store here is not really going to be the case everywhere. So we wanted people to have that option.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I love what you said about making spells your own too, because everyone's coming to their craft from a different perspective and life experience and intention. And so being able to customize something so that it works for you in terms of the ingredients used, in terms of the words used, in terms of how you frame it for yourself, that makes it so much more accessible, right? And so much more intimate to your own personal experience, which is absolutely fabulous. So then, I loved reading through all of the, I also wanted to mention how many fabulous spreads are in this book. Like, you flip a few pages and there's another amazing spread. And I love that there's some that are focused on the major arcana. There's some that are focused on the minor arcana, and then further breakdown where there's specific swords oriented or wands oriented. And I was going through and I'm just so excited to try them all, because you really run the gamut in terms of what you are focusing on, in terms of, you know, today I'm struggling with, I just opened this up and there's the mental clarity spread, right? Or a spread for managing pain in the creative process, which is a huge part of it. I'm working through the Artist's Way with some friends right now, again, for the second time. And that whole idea of the wounded artist and trying to unpack some of that. And that's such a powerful thing. So what was the process of creating the spreads like?
We kind of knew we wanted them in every chapter. And so we just each kind of did our own. I do think occasionally this is one place where we did like brainstorm a little bit more than other places, just because like I think we put 2 or 3 for each one, if I'm not mistaken. And sometimes we would just have a really good idea for one of our chapters and just like need the feedback from the other person. So similar to how Siri writes their own rituals a lot of the times for myself and clients, I usually write my own spreads. And as I've gotten older and I'm in long-term TBI recovery, I sometimes with clients will have to like write down what the placement is, because it's like what I'm making up on the fly. And I want to remember. But so even like when I do my big year ahead spreads, I have, you know, placements that I've not seen in other year ahead spreads that people really like and find useful. And so, and I didn't get to write a lot of spreads previously, even though that is such a big part of my tarot practice. So yeah, for me, it was really fun. It was really fun getting to engage that way. When I teach tarot, a lot of times when their students are like, well, what do you do if you are stuck on a card or a suit? And I think writing a spread is such a good solution to that. And so we played with that in a way too, by writing these per suit.
Yeah. I still remember this sandwich. I think it was a sandwich spread that you had introduced in your Patreon. And I just love the concept of that because it allows you to unpack something in a very different way. I'd never thought of incorporating cards together in that way, and yet it made so much sense for unpacking something. I just...
Did you want to...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, did Siri want to add something to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think some of the spreads too were just some of my tried and true spreads. Like you mentioned, the mental clarity spread, that's actually one that I use fairly often, and that like if I'm teaching Tarot 101, like I usually include that spread in with the swords. So a lot of them felt really natural, just to be like, oh, like this is going to live here now. Like this is great. I love this.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, I also write a lot of my own spreads, or lately I've been doing like intuitive spreads. Which I don't know how to explain adequately.
No, it's great. I do a lot of spread crafting myself, and I find sometimes it comes from the most random sources of inspiration or intuition, and it's something that I wouldn't necessarily have been able to come up with had I sat down with the intention of, okay, now I'm going to build a spread. It's more something that comes out of a conversation or an idea or something else, which is really magical, actually, that process. And it, again, it's kind of collaborative, like you were talking about, like even the act of having a conversation with someone can bring inspiration, and that's really amazing. Yeah. I really appreciate it, and I can't wait to try your 6 hats spread. That was fascinating to me because it's based on the book 6 Thinking Hats, I think you had written.
It's one that I read. Yeah, when I was working in a lot of offices, it was required reading somewhere. And I think in terms of that, you know, it is what it is. It is a lot of sort of like corporate creativity, but I think there's still a lot that I took away from it, including like pieces of yourself are going to see things differently, which is why it's hard to get clarity on things sometimes. It's why it's hard to find your way forward. And so that is one I have been working with for a while that I was excited to include.
Yeah, I'm so glad you did. I'm really excited to unpack it. I love that all the different positions have colors associated and different associations with, you know, your logical aspect and your emotional aspect, and the scaredy cat reference is so great. And the Pollyanna aspect, like everyone has so many different facets to themselves, right? So being able to unpack that in the form of a spread is super exciting to me. I also really appreciated and also can't wait to try the creative cycle spread, where you go along the Fool's Journey. And I love that that one is freeform and you get to figure out how you want to lay out your cards. And as a tarot practitioner, that just feels so exciting to me to unpack the tarot through the lens of that journey in quite a literal sense, in that you're going through and pulling cards for each of the 21 major arcana. Like that is so exciting. Yeah, I'm so excited about this book. I think because it's still so fresh too. Like I literally finished it this morning, and I was so excited to chat with you all about it. Yeah. So, what was the most exciting part of the book to write, or the part that you felt most the most fun, I guess?
I always really like writing up like exercises that I do in classes or in tarot study hall. I think that's really fun. So I really like, Siri brought up our one appendix earlier, so I will bring up there's a second appendix, which is all kinds of fun, creative things you can do with tarot cards, and also ways you can incorporate tarot cards into creative exercises, so it goes both ways. That to me is just so fun to write up. Yeah, so that's probably it. And there is that throughout the book too. Like when Siri takes us on the Empress journey instead of the Fool's journey, I was like, this is, if you have a favorite major card, that was their chapter, but I kind of added that in, like, try going through the journey with that card. So I just love writing up just different exercises people can do to learn their cards better, tap into their creativity, etc.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, I think probably my favorite part of the book that I wrote was the chapters on the majors, so the chapter on archetypes, and then the Fool's journey as the Empress's journey ended up being like one of the favorite things that I've written in the book. And I don't know if I'm going to like make this public, but I kind of do want to go through the entire major arcana and like do that.
Yeah.
But it seems a little too repetitive. Like, I think it's just for me. Like, I don't know if it's like anybody else would find that interesting. So, yeah, I highly encourage people to do that themselves.
Absolutely. I mean, I loved the major arcana archetypes focus, because I mean, shifting that lens and looking at the entirety of the 78 cards of tarot through the lens of creativity and nurturance and that creative expression that the Empress brings can completely shift the meanings of some of the cards in ways that are so nourishing and nurturing. And I know that I've had conversations with people about the Empress card, and it can be a tricky card for some tarot practitioners because it's typically depicted as a pregnant woman, and there's this idea of maternal energy and literal birthing, but that's inaccessible or unwanted for so many people. And so this feels like a reclaiming of that archetype in a way that is very nurturing and very supportive and very accessible, which I really appreciate. I mean, I have literal children, but I still struggle with that depiction and that imagery, because I think tarot, more than anything else, should be accessible for everyone. It's a practice that anyone should be able to come to and find themselves there, right? Find themselves depicted on cards, find themselves depicted in depictions of archetypes. And I love that the creativity and the nurturing energy of the Empress is there in a way that, feels very accessible. So, I appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. What else was I going to ask you about? Yeah, I really enjoyed how you took a journey through each of the tarot suits as well and looked at the ones from spark to finish. That's amazing. And you have styles of witchcraft to play with and styles of creativity. And there's that cross-referencing with the major arcana as well, which is really interesting. And then how did you approach the journey through the wands and unpacking all of that? Not just the wands, but each of the suits. Like, what was that process like?
Yeah. So I'll start with the wands since I wrote that piece, and then Siri can tell us about some of their chapters. So I love the wands cards, and to me, my whole life I've written, multiple books about tarot. I teach tarot all the time. For me, that there was a sense of, it was sort of a source of, I won't say tension because I was never too stressed about it, but I guess curiosity of why this suit that has so many beautiful things to offer, creativity, trusting your own gut instinct. Action is so important, especially for those of us who are activism oriented, but for anything, you're not going to have anything if you don't do stuff about it. And so I think, and to me, that was such an interesting point that suit goes awry and ends so badly in a lot of decks. And so for this, I was trying to figure out what story structure is this? And I want to be clear that not everything that could fit into an existing story structure will or have to, but for this book, we just wanted it to, so people would understand how many different structures there were. And so I think I did end up thinking about fables and thinking about cautionary tales, and just because they end badly sometimes doesn't mean that all of those lessons and all of that beauty wasn't relevant. And I think there's something interesting in the way that fables, like a lot of types of story, were handed down orally for so long. And I don't even bring that up in the book, but I think it did color how I wrote about the wands. So I think for me, that was a lot of it. And that is in contrast to the cups, where I love all kinds of weird, artsy stuff. And I went into the cups being like, okay, are we going to talk about surrealism? Are we going to talk about, what are we going to talk about? Are we, you know, I had so many ideas for that one, and it does end happily. So there's that piece of it too, again, in most decks. So I think it went different ways. For the wands, I was like, how can I make this make sense even to myself? And for the cups, it was like, what thing do I really love that I get to talk about that I see in the cups?
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I have to say, the suit that I think I'm probably not alone in this, but the suit that I've traditionally struggled with more is a swords, for sure. There's some tricky cards in there. I would argue that no card is essentially good or bad. Everything's multifaceted. There's different ways of approaching it and unpacking it. I'm also Gemini. I've got a lot of error in my chart, so I think I'm in my head too much, and so that's why I feel challenged by it as well. But I loved reading through this chapter, and I feel like doing so helped me make peace with a lot of the cards that I feel challenged by. It was really, and looking at the Five of Swords in particular through the lens of the creative process was really healing for me. And the Six of Wands, you know, and looking at it as like a processing card, right? And looking at it as a reaching out for help and finding a different place in your work, like all of those things were really helpful in terms of like unpacking that for myself. So yeah, thank you for that. So Siri, sorry, go ahead.
I think I was getting to the same, I was going to say Siri actually wrote that piece. So if you want to talk about,
so we kind of talked about swords as like reflection, and that is really where we leaned into that like creative people stereotype of like, oh, people like process their pain through their art, and so that was kind of a big thing for me. But actually Cassandra writes way more memoir than I do. So we kind of like weaved in memoir and like storytelling about yourself and about pain points into that chapter. And so that was really lovely. I love the swords. They're like one of my favorites right now. I'm vibing hard with the Queen of Swords these days.
Me too as well. I had a huge block on that card for the longest time because I associated it with a very specific person in my life. Because of course, when I started court cards, I looked at the traditional, okay, this person represents this kind of person in your life. But then when I unpacked that and started looking at those archetypes through the perspective of everyone has aspects of the court in them, and being able to personalize it and seeing it as, sorry, I'm going on about this, but an aspect of myself rather than something external, I feel like I can claim some ownership over some of the themes and ideas of the Queen of Swords that are actually helpful in my life, right? So I can so relate to that. And it's so powerful to be able to do that. And it's interesting too how your association with certain suits can change over time, right? You can feel drawn to one suit at one point in your life and then find something else resonates at another time, which is exciting. Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you, but please continue.
No, it's totally okay. Yeah, and then I also wrote the Pentacles chapter, which I don't know, people sleep on the Pentacles, but I love them. Like, I love the Pentacles. And I actually am kind of debating, like, as we've been talking about this book and, you know, in general, like, I've been thinking about, like, next books or next creative processes. And I had the idea towards the end of our writing process on this book of writing a book that was just about the Pentacles and anti-capitalism.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Like the lessons that Pentacles teach us about our material life, and using the archetypes of the Pentacles to explain like the expansiveness of how we relate to our bodies, ourselves, materials, the earth.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's huge.
Without just being like about money, because I think that a lot of people get held up on Pentacles because it's like, oh, like Ten of Pentacles, cool, I'm gonna make a lot of money and leave it for my kids,
Yeah.
like, great. Which,
Yeah.
you know, sometimes it does mean that, like, genuinely.
Yeah.
Like, I do think that, like, money is a part of the tarot. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
all in there, but, like, there's so much more to it. And so I really enjoyed writing that chapter in particular because it generated ideas for future work. And I feel like those are always my favorite parts when I write.
Absolutely. Well, I love that. It's, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say I'm working on something now, and I went through a whole thing, and I was like breaking down the suits, and I was writing all of this beautiful stuff about pentacles and growth and how a lot of the best things grow and are slow over time. And then at the end, I was like, oh, right. A lot of times these are about money and career. Like I just, it was almost like a throwaway.
Yeah, well, and it can incorporate that for sure. I mean, money, career is part of our lived experience, but it's not everything, right? And as someone who tends to struggle with abundance, what you wrote about the pentacles in here resonated so deeply with me. And for whatever reason, what you both wrote about the sevens really hit home, because those cards can be tricky sometimes in terms of, you know, oh, the Seven of Swords means that, you know, someone's being devious and dishonest. But like what you wrote about the creative process and, you know, refusing to take ownership over the editing that you still need to do or the work that you still need to put into something, like that really hit home with me. And also the Seven of Pentacles and that whole idea of nurturing or reaching a certain point and unpacking all of that and having the pentacles separate from just monetary concerns, but all aspects of your lived experience, your physical sense, you know, your day-to-day life, like all of that. It's so much richer when you look at it from an expansive perspective like that, which I love. And I would be 100% here for a book on the pentacles. That sounds utterly fabulous. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, so what was the most challenging part of the book to write or work through or collaborate on or whatever?
I am, so I'm so sorry, but I do have another engagement soon.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
But I have plenty of time to continue talking deeply. I just wanted to be like, oh, we've been talking for a long time.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. I had like a question or two left, and then I will let you go. Yes.
Cool. Yes. Okay. So most difficult pieces to collaborate on. Was that it?
Yes.
Or to write, I think, in general.
Different aspects of the book. Yeah, like not to give it a negative bent, but I find it fascinating when you're approaching creative projects, which parts come with ease and which parts are more challenging and how that shapes up. Yeah.
For me, it's almost always introductions, and I did write the introduction for this one. But the trick I discovered this time that I'm trying with the things I'm working on now is not doing that until everything else is finished.
Yeah.
I think I always thought that I had to do it first so that I like could have it filter through the rest of what I was doing. But that is not working for me. And it was even really a struggle during lessons from the Empress, which I otherwise found really fun to write.
Yeah.
I think because I was going through like kind of this transformation in how I approach my own magic and ritual, like throughout the writing of this, like I feel like this is a self-criticism. I feel like the ritual chapters, I tried to get it really down to basics and just be like, this is really important to keep in mind. And I do think it comes across as a little bit, I would like to have added more beauty into those chapters and like my wording and stuff. So I feel like just because I was changing so much, and I'm a firm believer of like, I don't want to write what I don't do, you know? But because I was shifting, I also didn't feel like I had the authority to write the way that I now practice.
Yeah.
So it was a weird thing, and that was a challenge, I would say.
Yeah. It could be hard with writing too. I mean, with my master's thesis, I think I did a master's on theater history focusing on Natalie Clifford Barney's queer salonier in Paris in the started in the 1900s, 1910s, I guess, all the way up to just pre-war time. And it was a lot of liminal space and queer theory and all of that. But I had to write the introduction and conclusion last. because I needed the perspective on the whole thing in order to encapsulate it and bookend it, right? And I've only been able to reread parts of it recently, and I wrote it 15 years ago.
Yeah.
14 years ago, I guess. I was pregnant with my daughter when I convocated, because sometimes it's hard because you can be your own worst critic, right? And you look back over what you've written and it's like, oh, well, I could have done that differently or that differently. But from an outside perspective, I thought that the ritual chapters were very cohesive and there was a lot of beauty to it. And the magic of ritual really came through. So I appreciate that.
I think so too. I think you did great.
You did, absolutely. It was wonderful to read. So my last question, I guess, is more about marketing the book and what that's been like. Like, I know that you had a book event yesterday and you've had actually a number of different events. So what is that process like with the book launch process and then doing live events and all of that? What was that experience like for you both?
Oh, what fun. I don't think I've ever been asked that. That is really fun. It was so much work in the beginning, just like constant emails and constant, like, we sat down and we wrote out our rubric of like, this is where we want to go. This is what we want to do. We wanted it to have tour elements. And so we're going to Hopkins, which is not a true tour stop because it's like 20 minutes away from where we live, but it's still not Minneapolis proper. And then we're going up to Duluth. We have another one in the works for November. So we had our list of like everywhere we wanted to go and everything we wanted to do. And then it was just like endless email and back and forth. And so I will say that like planning a tour and a series of interviews is not my favorite part of anything that I do. I'm used to it in theater as well. I'm used to it and other stuff, and it's never my favorite thing. I really like, I don't know, I like just sitting and chatting with people and chatting with Siri. I think that the actual events, they've been really well attended. I've been really grateful for that. I think my first book, there was more than one event where like 2 people came and I knew them both. It was, and in fact, there have been a few places that filled enough that I was actually very anxious from a COVID perspective because we are still in a pandemic.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah. So to me, that's been really wonderful. Everyone's been really wonderful. Audience members have asked really good questions. I think it's been really fun, and bookstores have been happy because people are buying books when they come, which is ultimately why you do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What about you, Siri?
Yeah.
It's been fun. I mean, I definitely agree with like, wow, that was a lot to set up.
When you got married in the middle of all of it too, didn't you? Like last weekend, I think. So that would add a whole other layer.
Oh yeah, I got married.
Yeah. Having been through that process, it's not a small thing. And we wanted to get married like really close. So we had a COVID wedding, so we wanted to have the celebration like really close to our actual anniversary, which is October 3rd. I was like, well, the Saturday that's before October 3rd is the book launch. Like, I am not getting married the same day that the book comes out. Like, that's not happening. And I'm really glad that I made that decision. I, in retrospect, would not do the two at the same time. Again,
well, luckily, I don't think you need to get married again for your next book.
I don't know. So, yeah. Maybe I do. Maybe that's just, we just need to like keep renewing our vows and like ever more like
cool now.
ways. No, but so in retrospect, I would not choose to do that, but I did. And it's also been kind of chaotic because I've been temping. So I have a full-time 9 to 5, well, 8:30 to 5 job 5 days a week now for the first time in like 5 years. So like that's been a weird adjustment on top of book stuff. So I think that my employers are like, I don't know, like they're just kind of they're great. I love where I'm temping right now, and I hope I get hired on. But it has been chaotic to be like, oh yeah, and I'm gonna be in Duluth this weekend, and I'm gonna like be doing all of this.
Yeah.
it's been grounding at the same time. Like I'm really glad that that's happening. Other book tour stuff. Yeah, I think vamping with Cassandra is always kind of my favorite. Like it's like the highlight of the day. To like get to vamp with you.
It's also fun that we've been friends for so long, and I'm sometimes worried that my chaos in my personal life becomes predictable. So, like, it's so chaotic and you never know what I'm going to say. So at some point, that's not fun anymore. So actually, like, making Siri laugh every time is very fun to me.
Yeah.
I also think that my own, like, absolute chaos life, I'm realizing more and more, like, oh, wow, yeah, I actually kind of am a chaos gremlin as well. So I'm trying to embrace that. I'm a very organized chaos gremlin.
Yeah. No, I can.
And I feel like Siri and I also work differently, and that Siri is a secret chaos gremlin, whereas I am secretly, although if you think about things, not secretly, like extremely organized and on top of things. I just like, it's not fun to talk about. Like, I know it's more fun to just say whatever random thought pops into my head.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. Well, I know you have somewhere to go to, Siri, and I apologize again for the delay in getting started, but thank you so much, both of you, for meeting with me and chatting about this fabulous book available everywhere now. And I think it's fabulous if you're a tarot practitioner, but it's also fabulous if you're not. Like, I fully plan to mention it to my Artist Way group because I feel like this would connect really well with what we're working through right now about artist recovery and reconnection and morning pages and all of those things. Like, I kept thinking as I was going through about how many beautiful connections there are between those two things. So yeah. And as I mentioned before, everyone can find you on Instagram at siri.vincent.plouff, and then also mx.cassandra.snow, and then Cassandra, your website is www.cassandra-snow.com, and Siri, yours is northernlightswitch.com. Yeah, and you both have fabulous Patreons, so that's also another way to connect. So yes, thank you again. This was an absolute pleasure, and
thank you.
Kind of having the opportunity to chat with you about it.
Yeah, well, thank you so much.
It was an honor.
Yeah.
It was an honor.
Awesome. Well, I hope you have a wonderful rest of the weekend and week ahead.
You too. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.